Well, all throughout the scriptures, there are types, foreshadows of things that would come later. And so when we look back at the history of our people, and we see that we were in what land? Egypt? Yep. And how was life there? I mean, at first it was pretty good, right? But then something went wrong, right? And so we look and we see that the type of that, it wasn't that Egypt is an evil place. It wasn't that Egyptians are innately evil. In fact, who took us to Egypt to begin with? What's that?
Jacob.
Yeah. So Egypt was actually used for our salvation, wasn't it? Because if we had remained in the wilderness, if Joseph had not brought the tribes to Egypt, what would happen to us? Probably would have died. We would have died of starvation. So God himself brought us to Egypt. So it doesn't mean that Egypt is an evil place by itself. In fact, where did God send Messiah when he was a small child? Egypt. So we see that Egypt is repeatedly used as a place of salvation for our people, including God himself when he became incarnate as a child. But the type we look at Egypt, particularly at the time in which our people were oppressed, is a symbol of what? We could say, spiritually.
The world.
Okay, the world, yep. What else? Specifically, one aspect of Egypt that we say that when you come out of Egypt, in this particular instance, what is it like? What's that? Okay, a narrow place. Freedom. It's when you come out of Egypt, you come out of bondage, you come out of slavery, and idolatry, and all the things that made us, that were the weights upon us. And yet, interestingly, when we were out in the desert after God had freed us, what did we constantly want? Because it was so awesome there, right? I mean, people would beat us and starve us and make us work really hard. Yeah, yep. Oh, and the cucumbers, we can't forget. Oh, and leeks. And garlic, I mean, it's looking better and better. Beat me really hard, but give me those cucumbers. No, it's insanity to think like that. But we, as human beings, even still, we look back and we idealize or say, yeah, it wasn't so bad back there. And if we could remember and be back in that place. But the truth of the matter, it was miserable and painful and dark. And so we see that God brought our people out of Egypt, which was like a salvation coming out of. And in fact, as we define salvation as drawing close to God, what was the salvation of our people in Egypt? What was the whole purpose of them coming out of Egypt to do?
Worship God.
To eat cucumbers in the desert? No, it was to go out to worship God, right? So he brings people out, darkness and bondage, close to himself. That is true salvation, is to be close to God. And so we look at these types of what he's doing. So this story of coming out of Egypt is yours and my story. Yes, it's an ancient event of our people, but it's yours and my story because this is a journey of a soul coming into God, coming close into the fullness of what God has. So when he brought us out of Egypt, it is as though you and I begin our first steps and we come out of bondage of slavery and sin. We accept the covenant with God. In fact, that was one of the first steps after they were released from Egypt, right? Was to do what? It was to meet with God and to accept the covenant. It's like you and I, again, coming out of the world, coming out of whatever it is. Sometimes we come to faith and we go back to the world, right? Been there, done that. Got the t-shirt. And so we have to be looking at the scriptures through spiritual eyes. It's not just a great story of our ancestors, although it is, but it's a map and a measure for you and I to look back and say, where am I in this story? And that will be greater illustrated. So we make it to the Jordan. And what's the first thing that is done once we get to the Jordan? What was necessary?
Cross it.
Okay. And so what did we do before we crossed it? Okay, so he sent spies over. All right, so if you turn over to Numbers 13. Numbers 13 and verse 13, chapter 13, verse 1. It says, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, for that I am giving to the children of Israel. For each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them. So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, and all of them men who were heads of the children of Israel. Right? We're not going to read the names of the individuals, but we'll jump down to verse 17. It said, then Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said to them, go up this way into the south, and to go up into the mountains, and see what the land is like, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, or few or many, but whether the land in which they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like the camps or the strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests or not. And be of good courage, and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. And so they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob, near the entrance of Hamath. And they went up through the south and came to Hebron, and Ahiman, and Sheshai, and Talmai. The descendants of the Anak were there. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. And they came to the valley of Eshcol, and there they cut down a branch with one cluster of grapes, and they carried it between two of them on a pole. And they also brought some of the pomegranates and the figs. And the place was called the valley of Eshcol because the cluster of which the men of Israel cut down there. And they returned from spying out the land after 40 days, and when they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron, and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh, they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they said, and they told him that we went to the land where he sent us, and it truly is a land of milk and honey, and this is its fruit. And everybody that was there is awesome, and we can totally take this place. That's what they said, right? Look at this fruit. It's amazing. Don't you want to taste this fruit?
They gave it out for free. Free samples.
They got to see the land, and it was as beautiful and full and bounteous and abundant as God said. But then there was this little problem, I think, is that they began to take stock of what they were up against. And it says, in actuality, they weren't awesome. It says that the people, I love the word nevertheless, okay, right? So everything before it, bounteous fruit, flowing with milk and honey, it's just, it's a poetic metaphor of it's everything you want and more. But nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of the Anak there, and the Amalekites, those dreaded Amalekites, dwelt in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. Then Caleb quieted the people and said, before Moses, and said, let us go up at once and take possession of it, for we are well able to overcome. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children a very bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and its people whom we saw are giants. And there we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak, came from these giants. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. So we see some interesting developments here. They see the land was really great, and exactly as God has promised, but what's the problem here? The people. It's always a people problem, right? The people, okay? And it wasn't just the people, it was something else.
Lack of faith.
Yes, it was a lack of faith. But there were these fortified cities. Who can take those? They looked around and go, we barely have a few swords between us, and you want us to attack this castle? I'm not liking the odds here, is what they were saying. If you look at the last words, it says that we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. And so they were, because they saw themselves only through the eyes of human flesh. That they were weak, probably definitely not militarily trained. In fact, they had just come out of starvation and of being beaten and abused. Were they really in any honest condition to take on hardened soldiers?
No.
Not in the natural.
Not physically.
Okay, so again, we're using this story of our people as an analogy for our journey. We come out of Egypt, and God delivers us from bondage, from spiritual darkness. Are we in the promised land yet? What do we have to do? What's that? Okay, so we've crossed over, we passed through the Red Sea. On the other side of the Red Sea, are we at Jordan yet? No, we have to journey. And we get finally to the Jordan, and in order to pass through, you see, when somebody comes to faith, and unfortunately, the parable of Messiah, he says that there are four kinds of seeds. And people that are like this, like these, in fact, was it the majority or the minority of the spies that said? Majority. It was a majority. In fact, it was only two out of, roughly 12, right? And so only two saw things through God's eyes. And so how many people in their journey, they come out of darkness, out of bondage, they accept Jesus, and they enter and get up to the place in which they have to begin. Now, once they crossed over the Jordan, was the work done? No. Did they go, woohoo, we're here, love me? No, they were like, they want to kill us. So people come to faith, and they begin to this journey, and they walk, and they get up to the point in which, did the work get harder before or after they entered the promised land? After. The journey to get there was part of the travel. But their journey was not done once they entered into Canaan. That's when the work begins. Many people in their spiritual faith, they get up to a certain point, and they don't really begin to do the work that it takes to take the land. And the land with us, for us, is this heart. This is where our work begins, was within this space of our spiritual heart. And so we begin to see many people, and maybe we were one of those at some point, get up to a certain point and they fall away. They walk away from the faith because they're not willing to do the work that it takes to take the land. When you came to faith, was your heart perfect? Were you I accept Jesus and everything was perfect? Is your heart perfect now? Is your heart totally taken for Messiah? No, this is part of this journey that we're all on. And so we see that many people in themselves, in their minds, begin to count the cost after they've started the journey, and they get up to a certain point and they say, oh no, I can't do this. I see the spiritual fruit and it's beautiful. The cluster of grapes, it was an incentive for those that could see that God was faithful, that he was true, and that he would lead them into a true place. And in spite of what they saw, in spite of the giants, the cluster of grapes was a testimony. It wasn't just a little California cluster of grapes, which is impressive enough, and I might add, makes me kind of hungry. It was a massive cluster with grapes probably the size of like oranges. One grape. That's a lot of grapes. It was a testimony of God's awesomeness that he was saying, I'm going to give this to you. But many people look and they see the grapes and they see the giants, or at least reports of giants, and they don't enter in to begin to do the spiritual work, and they fall away from the faith. And they begin to say things like, what? Well, let's look at chapter 14. It says, all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, because that was so much better. If only we had died in this wilderness, because that's a little bit better, to die in the wilderness rather than Egypt. Why has the Lord brought us to the land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? And so they said to one another, let us select a leader and return to Egypt. right? Because that's problem solved. This is too hard. Let's go back to slavery. Warfare and work, effort to take that which God has given. Slavery, bondage, darkness, and cucumbers. No. But the people said, or many of them did, let's go back. Why do we return to the world? Why do people return to the world?
Because it's familiar, and you don't know about the unknown.
It's familiar. It's comfortable. At least you can be comfortable in misery because you know what to expect. But true transformation takes time, effort, and blood, sweat, and tears. And many tears are spent because this self has to die. This land has to be taken for God and for the kingdom. And so we see that they were like, yeah, let's select a leader and we can go back into slavery because that's definitely much better. And it says that Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before the assembly of the congregation of Israel. But Yehoshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. And they spoke to the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. Was he telling the truth? Yes. Baruch Hashem. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. And all of the congregation set to stone them with stones. And the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of the meeting before all the children of Israel. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people reject me? And how long will they not believe me? With all the signs I have performed among them. I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them. And I will make of you a greater and more mighty nation than they. He was done, so to speak, but not, because God is perfect. He does this and he incites something within Moses, which of course is a type of what he does through Messiah, because Moses is one of the greatest types of Messiah. And what does Moses do here that we're about to see? What is his role? Okay. Yep. So an intercessor, a mediator. And it says that Moses said to the Lord, the Egyptians will hear it, and by your might you brought these people up from among them. If they were to tell the inhabitants of the land, they have heard that you, Lord, are among the people, that you, Lord, are seen face to face, and your cloud stands above them, and you go before the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. Now if you kill these people as one man, the nations who will hear of your fame will speak, saying, because the Lord was not able to bring out this people from which he had sworn to them. And he killed them in the wilderness. And now I pray, let the power of my Lord be great, just as you have spoken. The Lord is long-suffering, abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgressions. He shall by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity on the fathers of the children to third and fourth generation. Pardon the iniquity of this people, I pray, according to the greatness of your mercy, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt until even now. And the Lord said, I have pardoned, according to your word. But truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord. Amen. Because all these men who have seen my face and the signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness have put me to the test now, these 10 times, have not heeded my voice, they certainly shall not see the land of which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who rejected me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him, and he follows me fully, I will bring him to the land which he went, and his descendants shall inherit it. We see that God, many people in this journey, they get to a certain point, and they turn their back on God. They walk away from Messiah, and they don't enter into the land. When the people get into the land, what lays ahead of them? Setting up tents and having barbecues? What was the work that they had to do? But God, can't you just snap your fingers and make it just easy? Sure he could. Why doesn't he do that?
Because you won't grow or learn anything if it's easy.
Whoa, why does it have to be like that? If it was simply come to faith in Messiah, pray this prayer, and everything's hunky-dory. That's cool for those that don't know what hunky-dory means. I'm being challenged in my figures of speech in many places, so it's cool. It's just simple. You just pray this prayer and everything's good. It'd be nice, I suppose, but is a house built because you wish it to be there? Or because you build the house? And so many people come to the point, but they don't enter fully into the work. Anybody can pray a prayer. Anybody can say hallelujah. Anybody can be in a church or a place and show up week after week. But few will put their feet to the path and walk out this journey through and by Messiah. So we see that God blesses what? Does God bless rebellion? Do you think God was really happy that the people were turning against Moses and Aaron? He desired to basically start over. But Moses and later says, blot me out. But please don't hurt the people. And that's the love and the nurturing aspect of God, which he shows through a human being, of course, pointing to Messiah himself. Because he intercedes for you and I in a way that we can't understand. But he does. He mediates in a way because he knows, especially now after having walked upon this earth as a human being. And he guides us. So it says basically in the next section that he basically executes a death sentence upon a certain family. Do you know what that was? I think, was it Korah? Or was that later on? Yeah. Yeah, he basically will say that, it's an execution of those that have rebelled. When people turn their backs on God, what is it like for them in that time? Somebody that maybe you've known somebody like that, who has been a believer, who has begun this journey and has turned back. Maybe you have been one of those. What is it like in those times?
Despair.
It's despair, yes.
Sometimes I don't think they realize, though, that they still have this false sense that they're where they were when they weren't under, let's say, a spiritual covering.
Yeah.
They don't see it, but people who haven't left the walk see it in them.
Yeah. Yep. So we see that this is something that the God he takes very seriously. Chapter 15 and verse 22. The previous portion of it is basically laws of grain and drink offerings. What were the offerings for? Because God likes to eat and drink? Okay, for atonement. When you brought offerings to God, what was the purpose of it? To atone, which basically means to what? Okay, you're turning away from sin. You're asking for forgiveness. Yep. And generally, when you bring those offerings, you kind of know what you did, right? I mean, you're kind of conscious of that, and you bring this particular offering. Verse 22, it says, "If you sin unintentionally and do not observe all these commandments which the Lord has spoken to Moses, all the Lord has commanded to you by the hand of Moses, from the day the Lord gave commandments onward throughout your generations, it will be, if it is unintentionally committed without the knowledge of the congregation, that the whole congregation shall offer one bull as a burnt offering and a sweet aroma to the Lord, with its grain offering and its drink offering according to the ordinance, and one of the kids of the goats as a sin offering. The priest shall make atonement for the whole congregation of Israel, for it shall be forgiven for them forgiven them, for it was unintentional. And they shall bring their offering, an offering made by fire to the Lord, and their sin offering before the Lord for the unintended sin, and it shall be forgiven. So what was the purpose of this offering? It was an offering for unintentional, or even what? Maybe sins that we're not even aware of. Why would God focus upon that?
Because we can't stand in front of him unless we're clean, 100% pure. So even if we sinned and we didn't realize we did, this is like a guarantee that we're going to him and giving the sacrifice and asking him to cover us with the blood or the blessing.
Mm-hmm. So we see that, does God care about sin? It's not so much that he cares about sin as much as he cares about us. Do you think God notices sins? Well, of course, he's God. The unintentional, even those that are done in ignorance, this is an example of the thing that God cares about the details. He cares about the little things. He looks and he says, I see this. Are you and I people that care about the details? That we're mindful of our actions and our words, or do we simply let them fall from our minds and from our mouths too easily? It's such a good practice if you can do it every day, a couple times a week, to be able to look back and say, over your days, did you say words that you regretted? God have mercy on me, a sinner. Did you think things towards people that you realized that were not true or right? God have mercy on me, a sinner. We begin to take stock of our lives and our actions and our words because they all have meaning. There's nothing that's unimportant. There's nothing that is, God does not wink at things and let things slide. That's a false picture of what has been shared in this age. He cares about the details. Again, it's being mindful. Does God care about our actions? Does he care about our words? Does he tell us that, if it just happens in your head, it's okay? Or what does he say through the apostle? Take every thought captive. Wow, I'm not there yet. But I must begin. I must be mindful of my actions because they're important. So this is a beautiful example of that which we have to take ownership of our actions. Joshua chapter 1. So we see that Moses was about to pass, and he commissions Joshua. What is Joshua's name in Hebrew? Okay, Yehoshua. Yeshua being the Aramaic derivative. Yehoshua, which means what? Okay, God's salvation. We see that the very person who leads the people into the promised land is named Yeshua, Jesus. The very person that leads people into the promised land is that one who is named after, who would later be named the one who leads us into the spiritual promised land, Messiah himself. What a beautiful picture. We see that it says in verse 5, "For no man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And I will not leave you nor forsake you, but be strong and of good courage. To this people you shall divide the inheritance of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and be courageous." How many times has he said that? "That you may observe to do all according to the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Now turn not from the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. And this book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, that you may observe to do all that is written in it, for you will make your way prosperous. Then you shall have success. Have not I commanded you?" What? "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." And then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, saying, we're about to enter the land. Again, a picture of those who enter into this journey of the work that comes. You don't want to stay outside. You want to begin to do the work that was within the hearts. Within our hearts, what do we find? Thinking of the promised land in there. What do we find within these hearts?
Doubt.
Okay, doubt.
Fear.
Fear.
Pride.
Pride. We look and we say sometimes, and many people do, and it's on the outside, they don't even get to the point at which they begin this journey of the work within. They say, what's on the other side there? There's giants. It's too much for me. And they leave a crucial element out, which is what? God. Of course it's too much for you. It's too much for me. Yeah, there are giants in this journey. And whether it's addiction and whether it's broken things, yes, there are giants within this journey in him. Are we going to look at the giants? Or are we going to look at the one who says, go in and take the land? Be strong and courageous. Not weak and wavering. I don't feel like it today. Yeah, I see that giant. I'll get to it. No, be strong and courageous, which means face it, deal with it. When they got to those places and those fortified cities, did God say, all right, have fun storming the castle? Did he say that? No, he gave them a plan. And then he didn't just give them a plan, but he did what? God acted. Don't think that the people marching around Jericho 7 times, or for 7 days, and so on, did that bring the walls down? No, they just got tired feet. But they were obedient, and they did what God asked. And God rewards obedience. And because they did what he asked, as weird as it was, so let me get this straight. You want us to march around this city quietly, as if that was possible. And then on the last day, the priests are going to blow some trumpets and something's going to happen? Well, yeah. And the walls came down. So in our journey, whatever the fortified city is, maybe it's fear. Maybe it's hatred. Maybe it's whatever it is, whatever the fortification is within you and I. We can do this. Because we can do this? No, but because we can do this with him, hand in hand. When we take up the sword, it's not just our hand on the sword, it's his hand on it. It's a cooperative effort. He doesn't do it all for us. And we can't do it by ourselves. But together, we can. God in you, God in me. So he basically gives them the command to go in. We'll jump over to chapter 3. It says, then Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from the acacia grove and came to the Jordan. And he and all the children of Israel lodged there after they crossed over. And so it was after 3 days, interesting, 3 days after, that the officers went through the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests and Levites bearing it, then you shall set forth from your place after it. And there shall be a space between you, and it shall be 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may know by the way which you have passed, for you have not passed this way before. Joshua said, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders for you. And Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, take up the ark of the covenant and cross before the people. And when they took up the ark of the covenant and went before the people, and the Lord said to Joshua, this is the day I will exalt you in the sight of all of Israel, so that you may know that I was with Moses, and so I will be with you. Who shall command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant? Or you shall command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant to the edge of the water, and you shall stand in the Jordan. And Joshua said to the children of Israel, come here and hear the words of the Lord your God. Joshua said, by this you shall know that the living God is among you, that he will without fail drive out before you all the ites. We'll just leave it at that. And behold, this is verse 11. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of the earth is crossing over you before the Jordan, before you into the Jordan. Now therefore, take up yourselves 12 men from the tribe of Israel, 1 man from each tribe. It shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests bear the ark of the Lord, and the Lord of all the earth shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off, and the waters that shall come from upstream shall stand as a heap. And so it was when the people set out from their camp to cross over to the Jordan with the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people. And those who bore the ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests who bore the ark dipped into the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflowed all its banks during the whole time of the harvest. That the waters who came down from upstream stood still and rose in a heap very far away at Adam, and the city besides are 10. And the waters that went into the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, failed and were cut off. The people crossed over opposite Jericho. Miracle. They began the next part of their journey, to enter into the labor, the work that it takes to take the land. And this is, again, there's been many signs in your life where God has done miracles for you in the past. Amen? The next chapter speaks about the memorial stones, remembering those things that God has done for you. Don't forget. If you don't remember, take time and look back over your life. How has He blessed you? How has He spared you? Have you ever been saved from death? So many times I can't even begin to think about it. Has He done great things for you? Make the memorial stones. Write it down and remember it. And then periodically bring those out and praise God for what He's done in your life. Why are the memorials so important to us? To remind us. And to remind us of what?
That He's always been with us.
Because what's our tendency? Yours and mine. We forget and we look at what? We look at the problems that are right here. We look at the giants that are standing over us at that moment. And when we look at that, and that's all we can see, is all the bad stuff, all the stuff that's going wrong, the things that seem so overwhelming. And we forget that God has done great things for us. And when we begin to remember the things that God has done for us, the giant gets a little shorter, and the problems begin to be a little bit, we can maybe take a breath, and we begin to remember that He who is with us has power over all of these things. Yeah, the giant is in front of us, but there's a giant behind us who's saying, that's one of mine. And we have to remember that we're surrounded by His angels, His heavenly hosts that are constantly at war for us. And whatever the problem is, whatever the challenge is, it can be overcome. And you will come out on the other side stronger. You may shed a little bit of blood and a few tears in the process, but it's part of the journey. The desert is hot, and the winds are harsh. And sometimes it seems like it goes on forever. But every so often, there's always an oasis, and that's God's blessing and providence for us. We see that He blesses them, and then chapter 4 are the memorial stones. Chapter 5 deals with circumcision. Why did the people have to be circumcised? But wait, they were already in the promised land. They had to be circumcised. Because why? Because they didn't do it in Egypt. And so, yeah. So for you and me today, what is the circumcision that all of us are to undergo, both men and women? Cutting away the unnecessary things so that it leaves a pure heart. This is, again, this typology. It says that, do you remember like what they named this particular place? Gilgal, which means what?
Reproach.
He says, I rolled away your reproach. When we come to faith and He circumcises our hearts, He rolls away all the things that burdened us in the sense of that which was killing us. And we stand in a place where we are His children, and we begin to have a new portion of the journey, the next steps. Okay, They've been circumcised, and they're in pain. Was everything cool and kosher? Did the land just come to them? Interestingly, the next little section, which we won't take time to read, Joshua looks over, and there's a man with a sword. And he says, "Oh, are you for us or against us?" And what does the man say?
Neither.
He says, "No, not for you or against you." He was, but he was trying to make a point of I'm beyond sides. I am. And then he says something really interestingly to Joshua. Take off what?
Shoes.
He makes a very poignant statement that no other angel ever did. Because every time that someone bowed before an angel, the angel would always say what? Get up, get up. I'm a servant like you. But this one did not. He says, I am. And it was a very powerful encounter for Joshua. Chapter 6, again, we're not taking time to read it because you know the story. What was Jericho for all intents and purposes? What's that?
It's like the heart of the heart.
Yeah.
Nobody's getting in.
That's right. Which is, we could say that it is what?
Impenetrable.
An impenetrable fortress. It's something that can't be taken by normal means. You can't starve them. You can't kill them by thirst. It's impenetrable, impossible. And there are places and things within you and me that we may ourselves say, I can't do it. It's impossible, God. But in order to breach that city, whatever that is for you or for me, what do we have to do? Yes? Have faith? Obey? We have to listen for what God desires. What is it that you would be willing to do to be free from that walled up city, that whatever it is? Because it wasn't the fact that the people walked around in circles and they blew shofars. It was the obedience to whatever that was. Is it fasting for us? Is it humbling ourselves and doing nice things for people? When you work out, or if you remember working out, what would happen after you exercise for the first couple times? I'm talking about lifting weights for those that... Did that feel good?
No.
Maybe not right then, but you have to build the muscle. And sometimes generosity, sometimes kindness is a muscle we haven't exercised enough. Sometimes being kind to people that just annoy the heck out of us. It's a muscle that needs to be exercised. It's something that you and I have to put effort into. Patience, is that a muscle that we need to exercise a lot? Whatever the city is, whatever the impenetrable place, God can bring it down in His time and in His way if we are simply obedient to His words. Chapter 7 deals with the sin of Achan. Again, these are all parts of our journey. This is all aspects of our life lived from beginning to the very end. What is Achan's sin? Yep. He was disobedient, but there was something within him that was broken. And how did he exercise that brokenness? Do you remember?
He felt he didn't have enough, so he took some, what he wasn't supposed to make him feel like that he had enough.
He says, I saw a fine Babylonian garment. Not a mistake. The origin of that place, or the origin of that cloak, I can imagine it. A finely woven, a beautiful garment that, who doesn't want to look good, right? Do you ever wake up in the morning and go, I can't wait to look bad today? You know what? I'm gonna mess my hair up and wear shabby clothes because I love it. No, nobody does that. We all want to look good. So if you see something that you go, ooh, I really want that. And I would look good wearing that. Now, here's the interesting psychology behind this. If he were to wear that in the congregation, what would happen? Because did he have that? I mean, when they left Egypt, they had some nice stuff that they took because they spoiled the Egyptians. They did take some nice things. Do you think that, men, if you suddenly started wearing a $3,000 suit, your wife wouldn't notice? She'd probably be like, hey, where'd that come from? Ladies, if you were to wear a $10,000 diamond necklace, it's probably like 3 diamonds, I don't even know what. You think that your neighbor wouldn't go, oh, that's really pretty, where'd you get it? So in his psychology, he took something that he desired, but he would never be able to wear it. He would never be able to spend that gold because people would ask questions. And we do things like this in many ways when we sin. We think that it's all about us. And in Achan's sin, his sin was basically to serve himself. Who paid the price? His whole family, but yes, Israel. His whole family paid the price, did they not? This teaches us that when we sin, it affects our whole body. It affects the wholeness. It darkens our souls. It can even make us sick because that which we have chosen to do. And it's, again, these spiritual lessons are so deep that it would take multiple sermons to go even just this one passage. But this is, again, a point of interest for you and for me to take note. Are we in that place where we serve ourselves? Chapter 14. Chapter 14 and verse 6. Of course, this is the distribution and the dividing of the land for the tribes. Only a handful of people are mentioned by name in which they are to inherit. And Caleb, who was Caleb?
One of the two had a good report.
Okay, so God rewards Caleb, who saw the same thing that the others saw, who saw the exact same bounty and challenges, giants, but he came back and said, it's okay, we can do this because God is with us. And he inherits something which exists to this day. It says, the children of Judah came to Joshua in Gilgal. This is verse 6, chapter 14. And Caleb, the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, you know the word which the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought back word to him as it was in my heart. Nevertheless, my brethren who went up with me made the heart of the people melt, and I wholly followed the Lord my God. How many times, again, people on the journey, they begin, and the people around them begin to say what? After they know they've come to faith. Family members, co-workers. What do people often do when maybe you experienced this in your journey? When you became a Christian, you became a believer. What do people say sometimes?
You believe what?
You believe what? What else?
You judge us?
You judge us?
I don't need a crutch like you have.
Don't need a crutch like you have?
I think they still look to find the old you. And
Sure.
how you really haven't changed. Look, you still did that.
Yeah. Oh, I know you. We used to go drinking together. Oh, you used to do this or that, and that person's faith begins to waver, and their hearts melt, and they begin to see all of everything that's wrong. They begin to see and stop seeing the blessing and the bounty which comes from serving God, and they begin to look at everything that is wrong around them, and their faith is stunted, or it wavers. The 4 seeds. 4 seeds. Shallow ground. What else?
Hard ground.
Hard ground. Okay. Okay. The thorns and the thistles. So we have 3 that aren't good and 1 that is good. The thorns and the thistles, the shallow ground where the seed of gospel it lands, and it kind of goes down a little bit, and a little bit of plant comes out, but then it's shallow. You can only grow so far. But the good soil is that which has been tilled, has been turned over, old life, the crusty earth that is there, is tilled under. And the rich, dark soil which is underneath begins to be utilized properly. Are our hearts filled with thorns and thistles, in places with shallow ground? Do we see the giants? As we're about to see here, it says in verse 11, it says, "And yet as I am strong this day, as on that day that Moses sent me, just as my strength was then, so is my is my strength for war, both going out and coming in. And therefore give me this mountain of the Lord, which the Lord spoken on that day. And on that day, however, the Anakim were there, and the cities were great and fortified, that it may be that the Lord will be with me, and I may be able to drive them out as the Lord has said." And Joshua blessed him and gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. Anakim, who were they? They were the giants. They were the abominations that remained. They weren't normal. It is said that they had sometimes how many fingers and toes? 6. They were big. They had great strength. But when Caleb looked at them, what did he see? When David looked at Goliath, what did he see? A giant or a giant pile on the ground? He looked at them and he's like, you know what? Yeah, I realize how small I am, and I realize what I'm carrying, and I realize how big this is. But I'm going to feed your bones to the birds this day. He didn't back down from the giant. And Caleb was the same way. He said, yeah, I see the giant, so it isn't just me going up against this giant. It's the giant behind me who will take this giant down. And you and I, whenever we face the giants, whatever it is, maybe it's despair, and that's a big one, we have to begin to call upon God. Help me, O my master. For I cannot win this journey. I cannot win this myself. And rise up against it. The giant will fall by his strength, by Messiah's strength, as we call upon him and we press in. What could have Joshua and the righteous ones of Israel at that time, they got to there and they said, yeah, it's just too much. What could they have done? Probably could have gone somewhere else outside of the land and probably settled and kind of done pretty well for themselves. Would they have fulfilled their calling? We can't settle for anything less than what God has called for us to do and to become. Because he has sacrificed so much so that we can live, and not just live a nice life, but to live eternally. He gave his life for you and me. And what does he say for you and for me to do? He says, now you lay your life down with me and let me live through you. And this is what he's calling to all believers all throughout the ages. He says that it isn't enough. You have to walk forward. You have to continue this journey. After they had driven out the ites, was everything great? Was the work over? What did they have to do? They had to settle the land. And in the land, did the land settle itself? Did the vineyards get planted and the crops get planted by themselves? Did the houses magically spring up? It'd be nice, pop-up house. But no, they had to put the effort into building, and just as you and I do. And what are the houses and the barns that you and I are building right now within us? Yep, and we call those things like that the virtues, the fruit of the Spirit. Those are the barns and the storehouses and the homes that we're building. Again, we're using metaphors because there's no other way spiritually to convey what's happening on the inside of us. He's desiring for you and I to build up a massive storehouse of patience, a massive storehouse of chesed, of loving kindness, which is a mercifulness. What is the castle that he's asking for you and I to build in here? Yes, and in humility. Humility was one of the greatest mansions of the heart. And he doesn't want a shabby, broken down house. He wants you and I to do the beautiful things that builds the humility within us. And the queen of all, of course, is love. And that is from love all the other virtues flow out of. But love cannot be maintained without humility. So as we begin, and we only scratch the surface of this, it's just too much to get into one message. But again, as God leads you to begin to see the stories of our people through spiritual eyes, we begin to see that it's a roadmap. You and I can read their journey so we don't have to make the same mistakes. So we don't have to get off on the same tangents. What is one of the biggest tangents that our people got off on? Here's the straight path, and they kind of got off over here, that we do too sometimes. They began to have other gods, other things that sought and occupied their affections. It's not a statue that you have in your house that you bow down and pray to. It's whatever takes you away from God. It's those things. He repeats this. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods before me. Because he knows what we're like as human beings. We're walking along and we notice something over here, like a Babylonian garment, and we go for that. And we go for that. And this is the journey that the world is constantly reaching after, that which will never satisfy it. So for you and I as believers to be those that have our eyes fixed upon God, laying aside all the things which distract us and walking in his ways. Can we do this? Yes, we can. Because he says, I am with you. He says, I will never leave you or forsake you, even if it feels like he's a mile to 10,000 miles away from you right now. He's closer than you can imagine. His servants will always be about us, because they serve him, and we need those to help us in this journey. So Baruch Hashem, the land is before us, and we can take it. Whenever the giants arise, look it in the eye and say, you will fall in the name of the God of Israel. Amen. Father, we pray and that you would just strengthen us, that you would just inflame us with the desire to again to seek and serve you with no reservations and no excuses. But we can press forward, Father, humbly and by your mercy and your grace, which empowers us. May you, again, help us and guide us along the straight path until we come into that time in which we enter into your presence and look you in the eye. Abba, may it be glorious in that day. Hallelujah to our King. Amen.